Oh. Good script.
Nothing funny in this. Here you are, boys. We're through censoring your show.
Good afternoon and welcome to the U.S. Comedy Arts Festival presentation of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Reunion.
How are you, Aspen? How's the festival been going? Well, let me ask a quick question. How many remember watching the Smothers Brothers show?
My mom liked my brother best, and she never liked me.
Right,
Mom gave my...
This is not true.
Mom gave you... Mom liked you best.
No, all right.
Mom...
All right, just be quiet 1 minute.
Mom liked you best.
You lower your voice.
Mom liked you.
To give you some facts, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour ran from 1967, it went on in this very month of February, 33 years ago, until a very angry CBS yanked it, and we all know how painful that is, off the air in 1969. Now, during those years, we had Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and the assassinations in Vietnam and Presidents Johnson and Nixon. These were turbulent times.
You mean we're not allowed to travel to Italy or...
No, not to Italy or France. We shouldn't travel to
Germany or
no,
Spain or
that's
anything
right.
like...
Nothing abroad. Absolutely nothing abroad.
They don't want us, American citizens, to travel abroad?
Not they. Our government is asking us as citizens, good citizens, to refrain from traveling to foreign lands.
Okay, all you guys in Vietnam, come on home.
The Smothers Brothers sacrificed their show because they wouldn't sacrifice their principles. And for that, all these years later, all of us here, especially at a comedy festival, owe them a huge debt of gratitude. They're all going to come out together. Tom Smothers, Dick Smothers, Bob Einstein, Steve Martin, and Mason Williams. Welcome them, please. Fellas.
I think CBS probably had to cancel the Smothers Brothers show because it could not be seen as being pushed around by a single show. I think they couldn't afford to do that.
Television in the mid-'60s was not like television of this century. It was pathetic in terms of not only how few choices there were, but in what those networks were showing. It was CBS, NBC, ABC, and basically that's it. It was all escapism. This was Beverly Hillbillies, and it was Bewitched. This was all of the fantastic shows that you can think of, all the pretend shows. As terms of an original American idea, Smothers Brothers was first.
Because it was a big secret until you got this show that you were this political.
No, we were not political until we got the show. After we got the show in the process of... it took 3 years, 2 years for us to be politicized, and the whole world, the United States was getting politicized. We just started seeing the war as something wrong, integration, and a lot of things were happening. And
I thought if we said a little less each show, we could maybe be on for 10 years.
Right.
And still get the same amount of information across. You know.
How does it feel to be right? I'm starting to realize this is really about them.
Yeah.
Nobody expected Tom and Dick, when they went on the air, to be controversial. They were going to be Jack Benny and George Burns and Bob Hope and all of the comics that had come before them. The roots were in the traditional comedy.
They were both very clean-cut, college-looking kids. They wore those blazers, and they looked, very non-threatening. They looked like the boys next door. They couldn't hurt you. You want them to date your daughters and all that stuff. And I think because of that, they were able to get away with a lot, and thank God they were.
I remember Tommy came home one day and said, "Hey, we got an offer to do a variety show on CBS at 9 o'clock on Sunday, which is called the Kamikaze time slot." I said, "What? Why that?" And he said, "Well, it's opposite Bonanza, And he said 9 shows have gone down against Bonanza. And I said, I guess we're going to be the 10th.
Now, 9 o'clock Sunday night is the most important hour in all of television as far as circulation goes, and therefore for the advertisers and for the network.
The lowest rated show on television at the time was the show that was opposite Bonanza, the Gary Moore Show.
I had a series of constant failures against Bonanza, and Gary Moore was one of them. And we were anxious to get it off the air and a new show as quickly as possible. Oh, I couldn't get a film show ready in less than 90 days, so we had to take whatever we could get in a live format. I learned that the Smothers Brothers was available. I wasn't entirely sure what they could do, but the gamble was one I had to take.
Research had determined in their wisdom that these young men would appeal to the young audience, and we needed to get a young audience to whack Bonanza over the head.
Frankly, most of us, more conservative types thought, this is a disaster, we're going to go on and get killed. But Tommy Smothers, bless his heart, said, look, if we go on and get killed, if we get knocked off, everybody's going to say, well, so what? They went up against the #1 show. Nobody else has beaten Bonanza. We're not going to take any flack for it. He said, on the other hand, if we're successful, if we beat Bonanza, we're going to be a tremendously exciting news story.
Manager said, you want to do a variety show? It'll be opposite Bonanza. And I said, our career's over anyway. I'll grab half a season and I'll
13 shows, ironclad.
Ironclad, kind of 13 shows. And I said, well, yeah, sure, I'll go to Mexico and go fishing. And they said...
So anyway, that's what
And I said, but I want control.
Creative control.
I want creative control on the show. CBS said, oh, sure. I said, what's creative? I want to control the writing, and I want to be able to hire writers. And
socially relevant.
I want to be more relevant than the sitcom. I want to... And they said, sure, whatever you want. You got creative control. And they didn't care. They didn't expect it to succeed.
Brothers Comedy Hour, show number 1, take 1.
Well, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'd like to help kick off the premiere of an exciting new comedy show, which you're all going to enjoy for a long, long time, starring Tom and Dick Smothers. Now, first of all, they really are brothers. They were born in New York City, well, way, way back in the 1940s. They were typical American kids, average in every way.
One thing you have to remember about the Smothers Brothers was that they were a product of their time. I mean, they came of age in the Eisenhower era. And some of their material and some of their attitudes were shaped in a much friendlier, less threatening time. Their father was an Army officer. They had been Army brats. They had traveled around the country. They had lived in a lot of different places. They were going to San Jose State, which is about as American a college as you can go to. They came up in the folk clubs, but they kind of idolized those old mainstream performers. It just happened that their consciousness had evolved beyond that, and eventually that became part of the show.
Hey fellas, Tommy or Dickie, would you please come out here?
We'd
Here, let me take this.
Oh, thank you. We'd like you to settle something for us.
All right.
Yeah, which of... Oh, now I'm myself.
Yeah.
Which of us do you think is the older?
You mean which of you two are the older?
Yeah, which is the oldest?
Don't do that. That is for horses. You tell the age of horses by
You mean it doesn't work with people's teeth?
Well, it might for me, but not for him. You see, his teeth are only 6 months old.
You are who you hug. I don't know who did that. Sinatra sees you at a party, he hugs you, you're at his level. And when you had George Burns and Jack Benny back then hug the Smothers Brothers by being on the
Danny
show.
Thomas and
Danny, all those people, they gave a credibility, and the numbers started coming up, so it was all together. Numbers were important because the numbers keep you on.
Well, we certainly were surprised at how fast it caught on and how well it did in such a short period of time.
What happened is that new, young audiences were making a point of coming to the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. It was appointment television before that phrase was invented.
Everybody's probably surprised. Here we are back for the 4th show in a row. Surprised ourselves.
I was wondering, Tommy, I didn't see you around very much. What did you do all week?
Well, what have I been doing? Well, I've been reading up on a theory on the correlation between clothes and politics.
The ambivalence of the show absolutely enabled it to survive because there was something there for everybody. You know, the counterculture was represented, probably too much for most people's taste, but the mainstream was also well served by mainstream kind of guests and by Tom and Dick themselves, who were clearly, you know, Americans.
What do you mean?
Well, it's just that you can tell who's running the country by how much clothes people wear.
Who's running the country?
Yeah, but you can tell by how much clothes the people wear by who's running.
What do you mean? Like some people can afford more clothes on and other people less clothes on?
That's right, exactly. See, some people, the ordinary people, are the less-ons. See?
Uh-huh. They're the less-ons. Well, who's running the country?
The moron.
I had no idea they would be successful. Never in my wildest dreams. Many months later, I was acclaimed for having such judgment, such courage, to have these wonderful young people there. And I, of course, said, well, you just have to take those gambles sometime.
A lot of people who didn't do a lot of television showed up on the Smothers Brothers, and the writers treated them with respect.
I was into the joy of the production of the show. We grew up in Southern California. There's always those mountains. There was always the ocean. There was always Bob Hope and Jack Benny and Betty Davidson, all those people. And they came in and they said, oh, it's so wonderful to be on your show.
It was a weekly show, so each week we started off on Monday with the run-through and then ended up on Friday by taping the show in front of a live audience.
'Tis a pity before the sun sets you shall be taken in my private carriage through the countryside and driven to my summer palace where you shall be thrown into a dungeon till your flesh rots. How does that sound to you?
Well, up to the dungeon part, not so bad. But nay, Queen, I am prepared to die for France, and you shall die with me.
I shall summon my gods.
But nay! It'll be of no avail before they hasten thither. I shall have run you through your queen part.
Tommy did not want, and Dick, they didn't want so-called sweetening. You couldn't fake the laughs and fake the applause. What the audience did was what we heard.
The show really started out as a pretty typical variety show. The thing that began to break it away from that was really the fact that Tommy brought in a lot of his friends, in particular Mason Williams. And Mason and some of the other young writers on the show began to push the show in a much more radical direction.
You know, I'd scribble down some idea and throw it in this shoebox, and when the show came up, we just dug out this shoebox and started looking at all these little snippets of ideas and things.
It was a creative control that I wanted, to have some writers that were sympathetic and empathetic with our sense.
I don't think Tommy had a briefcase full of notions that were going to shake up the network and the country when he came in. I think he came in with that goofy character of his and his brother, and it was charming, and he could say impertinent things to him, and everything was very bright and young, and with it, I think it evolved into that.
Our expectations midway in the first season started to change.
In line with our policy of taking a stand on the pressing issues of the day, we now present another in our continuing series of editorials. Subject, should the use of firearms be restricted?
I remember it was about that 10th show that he expressed to me that he was interested in shaking things up a little bit by virtue of saying things that were a little bit inflammatory.
I ask you, what is our most cherished right since pioneer days? The right for every man, woman, and child to carry a gun. This is not a statement of creation, but has manned meanings that even a child can understand. If you're old enough to get arrested, you're old enough to carry a gun. A gun is a necessity. Who knows, if you're walking down a street, you'll spot a moose. I feel these restrictions are a plot and a sporadic turn for listing. We at the Smothers Brothers program consider this personal attack on our own integrity. Personally, I myself carry a gun. Should I be restricted from carrying a gun? Do I look unstable?
We were writing comedy, and we started to find that writing some politically based satirical comedy was getting laughs. The audience was recognizing it. And that was the thing that was, I think, enlightening.
Stand up and be counted. Let's preserve our freedom to kill.
If you wish a copy of the preceding editorial, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Editorial, Box 1763, Beverly Hills. California.
It was seasoned and spiced up with political satire or social comment, but that wasn't the whole show at all. It never was intended to be. It was a show that was an hour variety show that had some social comment in it.
See, I think people remember the show as being controversial and having that political view, but the controversial part of it, I think, was the fact that it just wanted to include what was happening on the street as part of its spectrum of interests.
I think the degree of alienation in the country was accelerating by the minute, and a lot of it was generational, spurred by television, a younger generation not accepting the kind of hierarchical view of things that the parents' generation had. I think the Smothers Brothers and the young people writing for them really reflected that, and the growing opposition to the war and a growing sense that you could not necessarily take the word of Washington as gospel.
I think what happened is they got the time slot, they got the show, they got the audience, they got the clout, and then they became affected by the times and became more radical.
You have Tom out there who is this kind of boyish looking and, apple pie and mom looking kind of guy. And we thought, well, he's really establishment, but he's just, like now a moderate slightly to the left. What we didn't know is that he was way the heck over on the left.
Tommy would come in and sit with me and sit with the writers. Dick was great, but his focus wasn't in this aspect of it, and I think it was a good thing. Because I think if the two of them together, it would have been insane. They're both good writers, but Tommy was really more profoundly involved with the creative aspects of the show.
Oh, me name is McNamara, I'm the leader of the band. Although we're few in number, we're the greatest in the land. Ah, there's Hinnigan, Flanagan, Hannigan, Donahue.
Hold it, Clone.
Nelson. Oh, for crying out loud, what's the matter now?
Didn't hear one Jewish name in the band. You sure start some controversy there.
Yeah, I sure did.
A giant, great big band with nobody Jewish in it, no Italian, no Chinese, no Greeks, huh?
That's right, because they're all Irish.
A little discrimination, I'd say, going on in there. Hinnigan, Flanagan, Hannigan. I didn't hear one Palucci, one Rabinowitsky, or one Hayakawa, Iowa.
Hayakawa.
Hayakawa.
Yeah,
and I'll bet there's not one colored person in the band either.
That's right. Of course there isn't, because it's an all-Irish band.
Then you're going to be hearing from the NAACP.
Wait a minute, I'm gonna...
You heard me.
Who are they?
The National Association for the Advancement of Irish Colored People.
All right. Tommy, you made your point. My brother's absolutely right. These songs were written 30, 40 years ago. They're very old songs.
Bring them up to date.
They're out of date. Let's bring them up to date.
Bring them up to date.
Hit it, Nelson.
Oh,
Oh, there's Hennigan, Finnegan, Flanagan, Hannigan, Donahue, and McClone.
Bellucci and Suzuki and Macropolis and Cohen. Oh, there's every race and creed and nationality in the land, and they'll all march together in McNamara's integrated band. Yes, sir!
I would love to know about the process that went on there. How did you pitch ideas? How did you get your stuff on the air?
Well, I always believed that you could take the high road and stand up for your position. You know, I used to say to them, you know, CBS is like a high school. You know, you turn in your assignments, so they're the scripts, and they get graded and whatnot. And I learned all this stuff in high school about America, freedom of speech, and all this. And I said, I'm going to hold you to that.
Mason Williams, the head writer for the show, for much of it, was the soul of that program and really pushed more in terms of censorship. And I think he, in his way, was always thinking about the medium. I don't think the medium was thinking about itself as much as Mason was.
When you're a writer on a television show, I think you come to that position and knowing about television. You know, there's a certain a standard, or, you know, in other words, it's a public forum in that sense. So you know there are things that are not going to be on, and you're not going to swear, and you're not going to do certain sorts of things. I think that in our case, we just started realizing that you don't have to accept that limitation.
You don't only see it in hindsight. It was a process that was spontaneous. I look back at it and I say, yeah, well, it just kept kind of molding it. And Mason and I would take the script home, next week's script, and we'd sometimes torch a joint and look at this script, and we'd go, I think he disapproves of this. Anyway. And then we'd read this script and go, no, that's bullshit. Bullshit. That's good.
Jimmy crack corn and I don't care.
Jimmy crack corn and I don't care.
Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. I don't care. Wait a minute. What's the matter?
I don't care.
Now, wait a minute, Tom. What do you mean you don't care?
I just don't care. I don't like that sign. I just don't care.
You don't care about anything?
I don't care.
Don't you care about the world? You care about the world situation?
I don't care.
You don't care about that. What about civil rights?
I don't care.
What about the high taxes?
I don't care.
Well, tell me, what do you think's the greatest single problem in the United States today?
Apathy.
The first time there was any problem with censorship with the Smothers Brothers came 9 episodes into the first season. This was not a topical thing having anything to do with politics. It was Tommy and Elaine playing censors who were watching something, and we couldn't see it. We could hear it and just see their reactions to it. And it was a brilliant sketch, cut in its entirety. It was maybe that censors couldn't laugh at themselves, or they didn't want people to think about the network shows being censored, so they just disallowed the sketch.
Program practices in those days was a powerful, major piece of a network and totally independent from the programming side. So while programming encouraged the controversy, loved the controversy, wanted more controversy because it brought more viewers, program practices wanted a perfectly straight, clean, toe-the-line kind of program.
I was always, if something was edited, I was screaming, and there's always someone to pick up the phone from the press to pick it up. I always let everyone know when the show was tampered with.
I think Tommy was brilliant using the press. I'm not an expert about the press, but he could always get an audience, and he always seemed to have something to say that they would write about.
You become aware of program practices your first day on the job, because you get a memo from program practices about last week's script, about what's wrong, what's objectionable, what has to be changed, deleted.
What you have when you're a comedian is a point of view. If you don't have a point of view, you're not in the good to great category. That is what distinguishes you. So if you have a point of view, and then you have a censor saying you can say this and you can't say that and you can't say that, Your question is, why are you the arbiter of what I think people can take? And just a natural response to that, because I am about my point of view.
Ladies and gentlemen, a few shows back we did a sketch with Elaine May. It was a sketch that she wrote herself. And the censors, for various reasons of their own, felt the sketch was a little too, well, you know what I mean. Well, they just didn't let us show it, right?
Yes, the sketch was about censors.
Yes. Just coincidental. However, since that time, we've had some discussions about it, and since it is really a well-written sketch, and, well, they decided that we could show it to you after all, and I think it's very nice of them to let us do it, don't you?
Yes, right, and I'd like to show it to you now. It's a very funny sketch. Right here on page 4 and page 3, this page was especially well-written. I got a lot of laughs, and Elaine, we told you we'd get this sketch on. Right over here, this last page, it says, my pulse beats wildly in my wrist whenever I'm near you. This is only an excerpt. This is it.
They said you could show it.
Here's another part of this sketch.
They kept changing themselves and were smart enough to know what would hit and what worked and what didn't work. And what they did, the very experimentation, seemed to attract people, that it was different. And was the first show to deal with social issues.
This was a particularly fascinating time in American history, a time of great conflict, a time of debate and controversy over the war in Vietnam, civil rights, social issues, unprecedented kind of heat in the streets. And it was during that time that Americans were most receptive to having their popular culture and their politics mixed.
I was working in San Francisco at an improvisational satirical theater called The Committee. I was doing a character in The Committee that was a Berkeley radical at the time, which is what the Smothers Brothers were interested in me doing.
Lee French was really a hippie of that period. So the part that she played was very close to the real person. She came out of the audience in the first show. Tommy found her in the audience and just did an interview with her, and it was hysterical.
I hitchhiked down here from San Francisco, and I was just sort of hanging out, and somebody laid a ticket on me to come here. And, anything that's free, is a groove. Because, but it's really, it's really far out. I was just, sitting here in my seat digging you and everything, and it was really, really wild, man, the way you came down the audience, and you started to get everybody to sing and everything. It was a lot of love, and everybody was very happy and everything. It was really beautiful. I just started to blossom. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I could be part of that blossoming.
We ad-libbed the whole piece. It was completely in the moment, and it was completely, it was as pure as it can get, I think, when two performers are connecting.
Well, turn on is like if, you press a certain button and you get kind of like a high-frequency response in your soul.
The whole piece made it on the air. Nobody at that point had a clue what I was talking about.
The generational references that were especially evident in Lee French's material, that was an extension of the dope culture, that part of the counterculture that dealt with soft drugs like marijuana and LSD. And that lexicon hadn't percolated upward yet.
I'd like to greet all you ladies as I usually do. Hi.
When I did the Goldie Keefe Share a Little Tea with Goldie, I always did it sort of all in one, and I would just share household hints and information with the audience at home.
As you remember the last time we got together, I told you we'd be talking about how to get rid of those unsightly, unwanted roaches in your home. But you ladies were really on top of it, and you figured it out for yourselves. And I want to thank all of you for sending me all your old roaches.
The stuff I did was kind of designed with double entendre in mind, so that if I was cleaning my house and we were going to get rid of roaches, well, that made perfect sense to some mother sitting there and then some kid going, oh my God, she said roaches on television.
They actually got things past the censor in the vocabulary that anyone who was my age or older, I was a teenager at the time, understood.
It all had a feeling of now, which television wasn't real big on now. It was bigger on then, you know, as how things used to be with mom and dad and the kids and breakfast, and everybody wore a tie and a hat. And I mean, it was then. They were very now.
At the time, I thought, well, this is what all television should be about. This is what we should be doing. We should be commenting on the times. I mean, television is a medium of immediacy.
In line with our policy of taking a stand on the pressing issues of the day, we now present another in our continuing series of editorials. The subject, are our draft laws unfair? Here again speaking for our program is Mr. Patrick Paulson, Vice President.
What are the arguments against the draft? We hear it is unfair, immoral, discourages young men from studying, ruins their careers and their lives. Picky, picky, picky.
I fell in love with Pat Paulson early in our career. He was a wonderful put-on artist, and we took him on a couple of tours with us because he was writing some funny stuff.
Now, we don't claim the draft is perfect, and we do have a constructive proposal for a workable alternative. We propose a draft lottery in which the names of all eligible males will be put into a hat, and the men will be drafted according to their head sizes. The tiny heads will go into the military service, and the fat heads will go into government.
Pat was doing these editorials, and I remember Tommy and I were at an Italian restaurant on La Cienega. I think I said something like, you know, I'd like to run an object for president instead of a person.
You know, Mason was this incredibly far-out thinker, and he had decided he was going to run the Mona Lisa or the Statue of Liberty for president. But somewhere along the way, he decided, no, I'm going to run Pat Paulson for president.
A great many of my friends and my associates and my fellow Americans have been urging me to run for office, but what office I'm not at liberty to say at this time. Therefore, I wish to state that with regard to the presidency of the United States, I will not run if nominated, and if I'm elected, I will not serve.
We wanted to run Pat as a candidate to shed light on the political process. In other words, satire. By doing a satirical political campaign, you actually reveal to the general public what goes on in the real world of politics.
Mr. Paulson, how do you stand on the question of welfare?
Why should our taxes go to those that outside and get a job?
One last question, Mr. Paulson. A great many people have charged you with talking out of both sides of your mouth at the same time. Would you care to comment on this?
No.
I think the Pat Paulson for President campaign was one of the most exciting and successful satirical things the show had. He was also one of the primary colors in as our characters. He was the strongest defined color. Whenever we're in trouble, put Pat Paulson in the sketch, boom, and opened up.
However, in spite of my repeated denials, the groundswell of popular support grows every day. I do not understand why this is happening. The fact that I have a surefire plan of action to lower taxes, solve our civil rights problems, obliterate the national debt, and put an end to the war in Vietnam obviously disqualifies me as a presidential candidate.
Now we're just typical American boys from a typical American town. We believe in God and Senator Dodd and keeping old Castro down.
And when it came our time to serve, we knew better dead than red. But when we got to the draft board, buddy, this is what we said.
Well, I'm only 18, I got a rough shit spleen, and I always carry a purse. Got eyes like a bat, and my feet all flat, I have my ass up again.
Somehow, in the miscalculation of history that took place in the Johnson White House, we had ended up being impaled with 500,000 men in Vietnam. And it became, I think, more and more obvious that it didn't work. I mean, that it was a sort of military stalemate. Our superior military machine against their superior political dynamic. We could kill them and they could keep coming. So I think that began to seep into the bloodstream of the society, working its way, oddly enough, up from the young, not down from the older generation, but up from the young.
Well, I mean, it was right around us. I mean, we're living right in the middle of the most politically and socially exciting times ever, in the 60s. I mean, it wasn't very difficult to find things to write about.
The Vietnam War was a huge issue. I mean, it was tearing the nation apart. The Smothers Brothers were on the side of get out. But we were playing to an audience of mid-Americans, many of whom had sons and family in the Army or in armed forces. So we had to walk a thin line. We didn't want to, demean the action of real patriots, but at the same time we felt it was an unjust and immoral war, and that America's participation in it was shameful.
Now, Ho Chi Minh sure ain't no friend, that's plain for all to see. And I know someone's got a fight over there, but why does it have to be me?
So I wish you well, Sarge. Give 'em heck. I'm bound for Canada,
And if you ever get a war without blood and gore, boy, I'll be the first to go. But until then, Mr. McNamara...
Only 18, I got a roaches feet and I always carry a purse. I got eyes like a bat and my feet are flat and my asthma's getting worse. Oh, when I think of my career and my sweetheart dear and my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm going to school and I'm working in the defense plant. Make love, not war.
The first times we knew we were starting to have a problem was when we were hearing through various channels from the White House that the jokes on the Vietnam War while our boys were dying while fighting there wasn't something you could make light of.
The CBS had a very complicated and not entirely appropriate relationship with Lyndon Johnson. And the connecting link was Frank Stanton. And in every way, it would be something that good journalists should investigate. Instead, it was a living, endemic problem there. And it got worse during the Vietnam War, where Stanton was supposed to represent the interest of broadcasting, but he was also Lyndon Johnson's man at CBS. And Johnson would leverage him all the time.
When President Johnson was in power, Frank Stanton, who was then president of CBS, very often visited the White House. They were very close friends. He'd be there on a Sunday evening to watch the Smothers Brothers. President watched Smothers Brothers, and it was not uncommon for me to get a telephone call that Sunday night or the following Monday morning asking me questions about who was watching over the show and what they were doing, and was it in good taste.
I'm upset and angry and eager for peace. I'll kill anybody who doesn't love peace. If we really want peace, we could have it today. If all of our enemies would see things our way, convince them with soldiers and a bombing increase, we might wipe out mankind, but at last we'll have peace.
So wage a war for peace, drop a bomb for peace, shoot a gun for peace, kill everyone for peace. Oh, peace is our goal, that's what we're for. We'll have peace, but it won't be through war.
Mike Dan felt the pressure from the president and the group president and the corporate president, and they have a whole world that they're living in. They don't, that the Smothers Brothers show was not the number one thing on their plates. It was, to them, it was a little like a mosquito buzzing around, stinging them in the ear. It was not that big a thing to them. Tommy ultimately made it that big a thing because he never would let up.
This is the CBS, official CBS censorship book.
Oh.
Program practices, continuity acceptance. This is a CBS censorship book.
This is the official?
That's right, it is, and I got to read it. Well, this book has a lot of things. It's made me see the light. People in America, I've seen the light. I've transgressed on the roads of talk and and overdone many things, and I've learned always to watch my mouth and to watch my mind as I travel, because in America here, this book tells you everything, Dickie. This book is essential.
Well, they know because they've lived, Tommy, and those censors know. They really do.
Listen, America. These are the guardians of your morals, the guardians of pure adult grown-up thought. These men are highly educated, geniuses, PhDs, and sober judgment is their call. The Censor's Handbook right here will change my ways, that's for sure. I must finish reading it because they wrote it themselves. And
Well, why is it taking you so long to read such a skinny little book?
Well, it was written in crayon.
Every script was some sort of a battle. And Tommy enjoyed that very, very much. I mean, he liked the truth, and he liked to be met head on because he wanted to do a good show.
It was Tommy that was the creative force, Tommy that was trying to find ways to be provocative and be different.
Anybody who had a voice in the counterculture was a candidate for a guest star shot on the show. So it wasn't like, be a radical, get on television. It was a question of, here's an act that would not normally be considered for a network television show, so why don't we get them instead of, Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet or Wayne Newton.
Pete Seeger, who had been blacklisted and kept off television for some time, Tommy called me to say, could Pete Seeger come on? And of course I said, well, I checked, and yeah, he can come on. He's been on network television before. Yeah, no reason I could keep him off.
When the world discovered that it was a premiere episode in which Pete Seeger was going to be a guest star, it's my understanding that we got something in the area of 30,000 letters saying, how dare you put this man on television.
It was in the fall that they called me. I found out from them later, they had asked CBS, could I be on their show? And CBS said, well, let's think about it. And finally in the fall, they said, okay, you can have him on. And I think I had a few weeks' notice, and I flew out and purposely sang a bunch of soldier songs. And then I sang this new song I'd just written that year. I'd seen a picture in the paper of American troops wading across the Mekong River, and a line came to me all of a sudden. Waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on. I didn't say in the song who was the big fool, but you didn't have to think very much to realize it was probably Lyndon Johnson. I wasn't surprised when it was scissored out of the tape. But I have faith in my country, and I felt sooner or later people would hear this song more widely. And Tom and Dick very wisely took to the printed media and launched a campaign. Hey, CBS censors our best jokes, and they censored Seeger's best song, and it got around. And sure enough, I guess it was January, they called me up and said, Pete, CBS says you can sing it. Come on out.
It was back in 1942, I was a member of a good platoon. We were on maneuvers in Louisiana one night by the light of the moon. The captain told us to ford a river, that's how it all begun. We were knee-deep in the big muddy, the big fool said to push on. Well, the sergeant said, sir, are you sure this is the best way back to the base? Sergeant, go on, I've forded this river about a mile above this place. It'll be a little soggy, but just keep slogging, we'll soon be on dry ground. We were waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool said to push on.
And they left it in. So I had that knowledge that the program practices was just as confused about what was acceptable, what wasn't. And both of us were working, at odds, but it was a moving criteria.
I'm not going to plant any moral, I'll leave that for yourself. Maybe you're still walking, you're still talking, you'd like to keep your health. But every time I read the paper, them old feelings come on. We're waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on.
Smothers Brothers coming out. 0202, show number 1. Take 1.
The war in Vietnam keeps on a-raging. Blacks and whites still haven't worked it out. Pollution, guns, and poverty surround us. No wonder everybody's dropping out. But we're still here. Oh yeah, we're still here. We face the same old problem, but we're still here. That big grind is stretching out before us. Beeping sensors lurking in the wing. CBS would like to give us notice, and some of you don't like the things we say, but we're still here. He's still there, and so am I.
1968 was a watershed year in American life. The Tet Offensive makes a shambles of all the rationales of the Johnson administration. I mean, it's very clear that the enemy is tough, that it's resilient, that we have not almost done away with it, that they know how to fight, that they're very brave, and that the war can quite possibly go on endlessly. In April 1968, Martin King is assassinated in Memphis, and about 2 months later, in June, Robert Kennedy, on the night of winning the California primary, is assassinated. And the country is tearing apart. The center does not seem to hold. There is a new degree of radicalism among the young. On the other side, Nixon has quietly come back from political exile and is about to get the Republican nomination. And the country is is almost having a nervous breakdown. And that is the setting of the middle of 1968.
In the summer of 1968, I was producing Glenn Campbell's show as our summer replacement and had an opportunity to bring in some new writers. Mason Williams said, "Guy, you got to come out to the Ice House. There's this guy named Steve Martin. He's kind of funny. He does weird things he does, kind of weird, kind of off. Anything that was weird or different was, I thought it was wonderful."
Tommy came to me and said, "I'm going to hire so-and-so and so-and-so, and of this list, who would you like to hire?" And I said, "Steve Martin."
I had no track record, no nothing. I wasn't in the union.
You also had no office.
No office. But I found out later I was making $300 a week, and I found out later that Mason was paying me out of his own pocket.
Oh, that's great. I had come to Los Angeles with an improvisational comedy review called The Committee, and we were playing in a theater up on the Sunset Strip doing 6 nights a week of improvisational comedy.
We'd go see these people because we were looking for a different point of view, not just our own, but one with a little more edgy, a little brighter, a little smarter.
And Tom came in to see the committee, and he decided to hire Carl Gottlieb and myself from that company. Then ultimately we were, kept on for the fall season.
The Army guy says, "Well, I'll tell you."
I was 21 at the time, and it was my first writing job, and I think I was, at that time, probably the youngest writer, on a network television show.
Rob Reiner was, an in-your-face revolutionary, and he was always saying, "Oh, you're not doing enough. You're not really carrying the banner forward in as aggressively as you could."
He was going, "God, you cop-out. Don't you, man, you're letting these capitalist pigs change your minds." I mean, it was really, and I'm going, wait a second, now I'm the guy in the suit.
Who wrote the heavy satirical piece that's going to get all the letters?
The material for the show came out of the daily newspapers. We just had to look out the window or walk down to the farmer's market for a newspaper and come back, and there was all the material for the show.
My old man's a Negro. What do you think about that?
Wait a minute. What do you mean? Hold on. I'm afraid you're incorrect.
My old man's a Negro.
He is not a Negro.
You are a
no
fascist.
Chance. I'm not a fascist.
Then you know some people who are.
I know you, and I know me, and I know you're my brother, so that makes it impossible, absolutely genetically impossible for your old man to be a Negro. You know why? Because my old man is not a Negro.
No wonder Mom always liked you best.
Anybody who was espousing, we're all one, we're all equal, we're all one world, do unto others, was getting hammered. I mean, we had in a space of 5 years in this country, between 63 and 68, 5 leaders were assassinated who all essentially embody the same philosophy. I mean, between Medgar Evers, John and Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, we had 5 people who were our leaders, great leaders, who were espousing brotherhood and equality and, you know, we're all one and family of man. And they were all assassinated. And so it was no surprise that anybody who was espousing that on television would be essentially, you know, artistically assassinated.
It seemed to me that program practices had a mission, and they were out to try to sanitize that show. It took a little bit of the fun out of what we were doing because we knew they were looking over our shoulders.
Well, I was trying to define their rules because I didn't feel there was any rules as far as that we were breaking, according to anything I had read from the FCC and the licensing committees. Put the request of what you want taken out of our show, that you find offensive or that is supposed to be censored, doesn't fit program practices, put it in writing. I want these things in writing. Something about I had this feeling that there's something legally is going to happen down here, and I want it in writing.
The most dangerous thing to do with censors is to do their work for them, to be sitting alone in the room during the creative process and say to yourself, oh, let's not do that, we'll never get it in.
My name is Jim Freedom.
Who are you?
I'm the hot dog at the baseball game. I'm the funny papers on Sunday morning. I'm the lump in your throat on the 4th of July. And lots more.
Like what?
Well, I'm the farmer, the carpenter, the clerk in the store, the bricklayer, the cowboy. I'm the girl next door.
You're sure a lot of things, Jim.
Well, I'm Mom. I'm apple pie. I'm your dog, and lots more. I'm Jim Freedom, and that's what you're fighting for.
Gee, Sarge, I understand now. I'm not afraid anymore. I can kill, but I still can't vote.
When things were at their peak, maybe for about a year, I was devoting up to maybe a third of my time. And I was involved because Tommy didn't want to talk to any deputies. And it was doubly difficult for me because I happened to think that most of what he was trying to do was wonderful.
It wasn't that we could write that script and walk away from it and just produce it and get it done. It was a constant fight, and it was constant.
Sometimes we would present a show and CBS would take it and edit it. Other times they would say, after the show was done, they said, we can't accept that. And so we would go down there to make an artistic edit to make it smoother.
When CBS kept getting in the way and saying we were controversial, my thought was the stuff we created was not meant to be. And had they not mentioned it, I wouldn't have known it was controversial, neither would the public. They reacted and created something that wasn't really intended. To be relevant, yes. To have good taste, yes. To have little messages, yes. To be entertaining, number one, yes.
Look, you're not green, you're red, so you can't be a pro.
Then what am I then?
You know, now that you mention it, I'm not sure. But since you're red, and you look sort of dumb, I'd say you were a lobster.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a wart. You're going to get a big, ugly wart. Listen, you two, now, what is your problem?
She says just because I'm red, I'm not a frog. She said.
Well, he is not a frog because frogs are green.
But that's not entirely true.
Well, now you know what happens when you let one red frog in.
Do you have something important?
Something very important to say on American television.
You know, a lot of times we don't have opportunity of saying anything important because it's American television. Every time you say something and try to say something important, they...
Well, whether you can say it or not, keep trying to say it.
I had gotten a lot of calls to appear on the Smothers Brothers show. And fortunately for me, this particular call in 1968 was one that I could accept. And it turned out to be the call of all calls.
The writers and Bly and Mason, I believe it was, they worked on taking these, putting a group of songs together, working with Harry, and using footage from the Democratic Convention in Chicago, '68, where all the violence and protest took place, and putting them against each other.
When they talked about using the song, which had its roots in the Caribbean and was about a festival and a carnival and all that meant, as the conversation evolved, they felt that it would be a wonderful environment in which to show the carnival-like atmosphere of American politics, especially within the political parties, what their conventions were like. And in particular, the Democratic Convention and what had happened in Chicago.
All the contradictions and all the conflicts of the Democrats are there when they hold their convention in Chicago. Because the war has divided the Democrats, a number of sort of radical, alienated young guys would go in and start having a counter convention. And Mayor Daley, as he sends his cops out into the street, and you get something of a bloodbath.
For this event to erupt into this violence, and for the megalomania of Richard Daley to have become so evident, and for all this arrogance to have been captured on camera was in a way quite startling. And we saw in all of that the opportunity as artists to make commentary.
Freedom's gone and the country is not our own. Lord, don't stop the carnival. Lord, don't stop the carnival. Carnival's an American bacchanal. Lord, don't stop the carnival.
We had gone to CBS and pulled the footage. They warned us, they said, don't put any of the violence in, don't want any violence in there. We kind of bent over backwards, reluctantly not to put too much of it in.
That is your country. Oh no, my country can be ugly so.
We viewed what we had done with some sense of delight, and we thought that we did a rather nice thing. Much to our amazement, we found that a lot of people didn't think so.
Jump in the line, rock your body in time. Won't you jump in the line, rock your body in time. Won't you jump in the line, rock your body in time. Won't you jump in the line, rock your body in time. Won't you jump in the line, rock your body.
But when they pulled it out, I was furious. It was a great piece of commentary and entertainment.
Sorry, that work you did, that stuff we did, that great skit we did, it's not on. If you're Tommy, I think you carry that to the next week and you start looking for battles.
It was hard for him. I mean, here he was going out with this kind of, cheery, simple-minded character in front of the audience every week to entertain the public, but at the same time, we all knew who he was. He was a very serious-minded guy who cared very deeply about what was going on in the country and wanted to use his television show as a forum to let people know.
The harder you push, the more they're going to push back, and they're bigger than you are, and you really can't win over the long haul. And I tried to explain that to Tommy, that you really can't win over the long haul, and you've got to loosen up and give them a little bit more than you're giving them. But he was just not able to do that because he was on such a roll, and everybody, I think, in his group was going, yeah, go get him.
By the way, I'm very volatile. You can't tell this, but I don't know if my brother mentioned it. I can be a screamer. I don't like that side of me, but it's part of my personality. You know, I feel cross. I can let it out. And some of these memos, I was letting it out, and some of them I was tweaking them, and sometimes I get tweaks back. There was a level of playfulness in here, but it was pretty deadly serious about what we were trying to get through as much as we could. That was important.
I used to tell Tommy, you know, you're going to regret the fact that you're not paying attention to your performance a little more. You need to make sure that you're not shortchanging what it is you end up doing on the show.
It was ruining my life, is what it was doing, because I was spending so much time trying to get Tommy to lay off a little bit, and I was getting beat up from New York all the time by those guys, so I was just kind of really miserable with the whole thing. I had a system in my office. I could just push a button and tune in any studio in the building, so I could just watch the Smothers Brothers while they were rehearsing, and I often did that, because my deputy, who was present in the studio, would often call me up and says, "You better look at this." So I would lean over and press the button and lean back in my chair and stop whatever I was doing and look at it, and more often than not that it was some kind of a problem then that had to be addressed.
Today's sermon deals with the exciting personality of Moses, who had a wonderful rapport with God, whom I'm sure you'll all remember from last week's sermon.
My sermons were edgy only insofar as no one was doing anything on the Bible at all. And the Smothers Brothers knew that, and they didn't care. They wanted it out there because they thought it was just something new, something that no one had seen before. They were always looking for what their difference was.
Moses was wandering in the wilderness when he saw a bush that was burning, yet it would not consume itself. A voice came out of the heavens. "Moses, take off your shoes from off of your feet," God said in his redundant way.
It's one thing for David Steinberg to be able to do that in clubs, but to put it on national television over the airwaves to millions and millions of people took a tremendous amount of guts, and quite frankly, a lot of guts for the network to allow it to be on.
Well, Moses took his shoes off, approached the burning bush, and burnt his feet. God went, "Aha! Third one today."
3 weeks after it was on the air, Tommy and Dick said, "We've got the most negative mail, I think, ever." So I knew that there was trouble about this, and to Tommy and to Dick, it was, we're having you back on. And I'm sure CBS said to them, you can't have Steinberg back on again. Or if he does come on, don't have him do the sermon.
The networks didn't want bad letters. They didn't want good letters. They didn't want any letters.
Individual station has the right, and they should have the right, to carry only the episodes or programs that they want to be viewed in their community.
Each of the networks owned, as they still do, some of the most profitable television stations in the United States, primarily those in the very largest markets. The affiliates, by contrast, were stations not owned by the networks, but affiliated by contract with the networks. The affiliates then had the power to accept or reject some programs.
We reached a decision that we would show the tape, be aired the following Sunday, to the affiliates on a Wednesday or Thursday at 5 o'clock, and they could make that decision. I became an authority on the transcontinental airline schedules and who was bringing it sometimes. You don't think we were going to let some ordinary mail courier or special delivery set up for that tape. It was carried in one's precious attaché case like it was a armistice document.
Networks are built on advertiser support, support from the affiliates, on government approval, and they're not going to stand for someone jeopardizing any of those areas for them.
Smothers Brothers Hour.
And the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had become a thorn in the side of the network. If it had been a #1 show still, I think they would have found a way to tolerate it. But we'd slipped. We'd slipped in the ratings, and at that point in time, we were vulnerable.
Later on, when hunks of material be excised from the show, censored from the show, there was time to fill. I took those times to talk to the audience. That's when I had lost my balance as a comedian, and it was hard for me to be funny.
Letters that are...
And there's some tapes there I look at and I cringe, that I'm so desperately sincere. And
We get a lot of complimentary letters, but we get a lot of derogatory letters saying that we are communists, pinkos. And those are the good letters. Un-American and things
Don't
like
forget, their success came from being fun. Well, you can't have a lot of fun if you take up a lot of causes. And constantly are in the headlines of the papers. Are they right? Are they wrong?
The most significant change that happened and really, I think, brought on the demise of the Smothers Brothers show was that a new president, Mr. Wood, was installed as the president of CBS. About the same time, by the way, there was a change in the president of the United States. There was fear in the television industry that the Nixon administration would be tough on television. And yet here was the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour taking potshots at the administration.
So, these next 4 years are going to be the most out-of-sight years for the younger generation and for everybody in America.
Fine, I'm glad you feel that.
See, part of the thing is that people didn't realize, if you look back on Richard Nixon's history, when he was vice president before and during these times, it's out of sight, man. It's going to blow America's mind when he gets into office and starts swinging. Wow!
Yeah, great. I don't understand why you. What history, past history?
Think back. Do you remember when he was vice president? Every single country he ever went to, he got stoned.
I think they were much more scared at Black Rock in the Nixon years than they were in the Johnson years. There's no doubt that the Nixon people were significantly more hostile to the broadcast media, and the media in general, but specifically the broadcast media than Johnson, that there was a conservative tradition of believing that the big media, and particularly broadcast, was somehow liberal. And there was also the vulnerability of the networks to their federal licenses. And there was a lot of talk in the Nixon years of taking CBS's license away. I think they felt when Nixon came in that the wind that was blowing was much, much colder.
I don't want to do this. I don't like it. It's a drag. What a drag to have to do this. 18,000 people got to go through this.
What are you
just
doing,
because
Tom?
a certain few people make you do this, and it's
What are you doing?
disgusting.
What are
It
you
makes-
doing?
Nothing. I'm really getting...
What are you doing?
I'm getting ready because I'm
You're
bugged.
making a
Because
mess.
there's a few people, men, are messing up for 18,000 other people, and you got
Just
to go...
what are you doing? We're trying to start a show. Now, I can't hear you. What are you doing?
I'm getting ready to go to college.
If Johnson was president, that gave us one kind of a target. When Nixon became elected and we had a Republican government, that gave us cause for concern. But, hard times make for good comedy.
You gotta watch yourself, Tommy. No more Nixon jokes, okay?
Oh, no, whatever anyone else says, that's one might say Richard Nixon is our president-elect, and he's got the toughest job
Now, you're
in
not putting me on.
the
I mean,
world.
you're serious, right?
Well, we've all played, I think everybody, we can say, has played a little loose with his
Right.
image during the campaign, but that's all behind us now, because he's our man.
That's right. And history has shown us that almost every president begins his term in office with the absolute support of the entire nation, and free from slanders and jokes.
That's right, Dickie. And for the start of his term, we are going to give our President Nixon our full support and lay off the jokes entirely.
That's right.
He's going to be in office for at least 4 years, and I'm sure we'll be able to get around to him a little bit
Now,
later.
wait a minute.
One of the classic stories is how Joan Baez appeared on the show, and she dedicated the song to her then husband, David Harris, who was a war resistor and a draft protester who had been jailed for his failure to register for the draft.
If you were tapping in to Joan Baez and she was talking about her then husband, David Harris, who was a very articulate early anti-war activist, you were giving legitimacy to the peace movement, which I think would have made powerful people in Washington nervous. I don't think they wanted to grant it that kind of legitimacy.
Tommy would say, do what is you. And I felt very strongly that at that time my ex was in prison and I was pregnant, and I wanted people to know why. Otherwise, I would have felt incomplete.
So Joan, as she's strumming the introduction for her song, says to the camera, this song is for my husband David, a prisoner of conscience.
David's a sort of a California hillbilly. So the songs on the record are all country and western, and it's a kind of a gift to David because he's going to be going to prison probably in June, and he'll be there for 3 years. The reason he's going is that he refused to have anything to do with the draft or selective service or whatever you want to call it, militarism in general. And the point is, if you do that and you do it up front or overground, then you're going to get busted.
We presented this show to CBS, and they made an edit.
When the show went on the air, there was this absurd edit in the midst of her introduction. So what you saw was...
It's a kind of a gift to David because he's going to be going to prison. So this song is called The Green, Green Grass of Home.
I was explaining this to somebody I know, and I said, I was so difficult in those days. He said, no, you were clear. Well, I was absolutely clear what I needed to do. I think that I knew what the consequences might be, and they weren't consequences for me. And it was most extraordinary in those days, and probably even more so now, but for somebody to put themselves on the line, somebody who had that much, to lose, basically.
The censorship issue became obsessive because it became like somebody who just had to win. And it didn't become any more about the material or the humor or the issues. It became about minding.
We've done good things on this show. We have done some great things, but you haven't seen them because of the censor. The censor sits somewhere between the scenes to be seen and the television sets, with his scissor purpose poised, watching the human stuff that will sizzle through the magic wires and light up like welding shops the ho-hum rooms of America, and with the kindergarten arts and crafts concept of moral responsibility, snips out the rough talk, the unpopular opinion, or anything with teeth, and renders a pattern of ideas full of holes, a doily for your mind.
They picked up the show for the fourth season, and I said, if you don't want to pick up the show, don't pick it up, please. Let it go. We'll go somewhere else. This is too much for you guys.
So Tommy went and met with Mr. Wood, and there was nobody there to act as a buffer. By those days, my partner Ken Fritz and I had both been eliminated from the mix, and Tommy was now running the show. And I think that direct confrontation between the artist and the president of the network caused the ultimate demise of the show.
I remember kind of yelling at him, face getting kind of red, and I said, I looked back on it, I'm kind of embarrassed about it. I could have talked to him in a different tone of voice. But at the time, that was our voice, was passion and anger, and that creeped in during the end of the show.
Last year, we had a young man, David Steinberg, on the show who did a sermonette. And we had a great deal of problems from that telecast, and it was all intended in fun. But we have Mr. Steinberg back with us again. We think he's one
Tommy said, you know, you want to do another one of those sermons? And I didn't think anything of it. I said, sure, why not?
He shot a lot of stuff the censors hadn't approved. You got to understand that. They say you can't do that in a million years. He shot it anyway.
Now, Tommy knew he was going to have to fight someone, and Tommy had a lot of fight in him, and I think he liked the idea of pushing the censors and pushing the network. So in a way, a clash was inevitable. But Tommy loved to upset the suits. He felt comfortable in a fight.
Old Testament concept. The Old Testament scholars say that Jonah was in fact swallowed by a whale. The Gentiles, the New Testament scholars, they say, hold it, Jews. No. Jonah, they literally grabbed the Jews by the Old Testament. They say Jonah could not have been swallowed by a whale, the New Testament scholars say, because whales have tiny gullets and cannot swallow whole prophets. Therefore, they offer their own theory that Jonah was in fact swallowed by a gigantic guppy. And to this day, the New Testament doesn't sell.
I resisted completely the concept of taking out the Steinberg sermonette. We'd had one in already.
It could not have been a win-win situation the way it was going, because it got to the point where both sides had drawn a line in the sand, and that was it.
It was a Tuesday morning. I called Perry on the West Coast, and I said, now, Perry, I want that tape in here Wednesday noon, and how are we getting it? And Perry said to me, Tommy is in San Francisco. The show's been made, but he is in San Francisco, and he's got the tape. And I said, fine, just make sure I have it tomorrow. We didn't get it on Wednesday, and I got very worried.
It was one of those things that you see it coming and you say, what a shame. What a shame that we can't do something to stop this collision.
Thursday came and I still didn't have the tape. And Bob Wood was president of the network at the time, called me and said, Apple, who was the attorney for CBS, thinks we should have a meeting. I knew what it was about. I mean, there was no secret about it, because everybody in the world had called me by then. at 3 o'clock, we all attended that meeting. There were 4 or 5 of us in the room. And Bob Wood said to me, Mike, do you have the tape of Sunday's show? And I said, no. And Apple, the attorney, said, we got him. That was his words, we got them. And I looked around and I said, what have you got? He said, well, we can cancel now. I knew that that was the end of the Smothers Brothers.
Next thing, I'm back in New York, and I looked on the front page of the New York Times, and I saw the name Steinberg, and I always was wondering, what's this other Steinberg that an economist, a sociologist on the front page of the New York Times? And it was me, and it was about me having thrown the Smothers Brothers off the air.
One day it was in the papers that the show had been canceled, ostensibly over some failure to meet delivery requirements, but clearly it was over a failure to agree on material that should be on television.
CBS announced today that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour will not return to the CBS television network next season. CBS Television Network President Robert Wood said he regrets canceling a program with such wide appeal, but he said that the Smothers Brothers consistently failed, under contractual obligations, to deliver their program tapes in time for review by the CBS Program Practices Department and for preview by affiliated stations. Wood said it became evident that the brothers, quote, were unwilling to accept the criteria of taste established by CBS. CBS News' efforts to reach the brothers for comment have been unsuccessful.
We were fired. I was shocked. I never played hardball before. I didn't know what that game was about. I was pretty naive, and I still am. You still don't know how those games are played.
In America, I think it's more than ever necessary.
I had my job, I had my family, and I had the time that was Dickey's for fun and growth and learning new things to do. The job was just part of it. The job was everything for Tom.
And there was a sense that, they'll work this out. And then when they didn't work it out, and the following season came and there was no Smothers Brothers, the tents had actually been moved and there was no place to stage a revival. And they just sort of had to go to the courts.
I was still at CBS when the trial occurred and put my suit on and went down every day to the courthouse and sat there till they called me. I don't recall particularly what I was asked, but I remember looking at Tommy and Dickie sitting there in the court and thinking how strange that it has come to this. I didn't know whether to smile or to look away. It was a very peculiar feeling.
And it took about 4 years to go to trial. He had no forum. And until we went to trial and had that 8 weeks of trial in federal court, it was just his word against their word.
The best bet for the Smothers Brothers to win their case was with breach of contract. In order to win on a First Amendment theory, you would have to prove that the government pressured CBS to take the show off the air, and we haven't seen that smoking gun.
It's important to make the point that the only people who really have de facto First Amendment rights are the people who own the media. So no newspaper editor, no entertainer has any First Amendment rights except those that the owner wishes to bestow upon them, and honor as a matter of grace, but not as a matter of right. So in that sense, there was no censorship issue here.
All the real issues were deleted in the name of winning. I was told by intellectuals and smart people, I said, this case, and it goes to court, you have to win. And if you include First Amendment, antitrust, particular those you have a chance of losing. It's more important that you come out a winner in this court case. And if it's breach of contract, win that.
I felt that it was David versus Goliath, Red Riding Hood versus the big bad wolf. I have to say that all the jurors were very respectful of the instructions that were given by the judge, kept an open mind, and yet I think in the back of our heads it was always cut and dry, and yet we did what we were supposed to do and followed the instructions into the deliberation process.
I think my position strengthened their case considerably. I had to quote Apple's remark, "We got him," as an indication that we were looking for a way out to get rid of them. If I'd been a member of the CBS family then, I could hardly have testified. I would have had to resign.
We found in favor of Tom and Dick Smothers. It was felt that they did everything they were supposed to do. They met all their obligations as per their contract, and CBS just was trying to play hardball. When the trial was over, we left the courtroom and walked out to our car, which was about 2 blocks away. We were followed about 10 paces behind by the 2 CBS attorneys, never saying a word. They just continued to follow us. And finally we stopped and turned around as to motion, "What do you want?" And they finally said, "Well, are you going to talk to us or not?" And we just turned around and continued to walk our way.
We were nominated for an Emmy Award for the Best Written Comedy Variety Musical Show on television. And we all went to the Emmy expecting to see Laugh-In get it yet another year. Laugh-In had won the 2 years previous. So we get to the show, we're canceled now, we're off the air. And yet, when they announce the winner, it's us.
In Hollywood, the winners are the writers of the Smothers Brothers comedy.
It was a fabulous revenge that the Television Academy gave us the Emmy in light of all the controversy over the cancellation of the show. No matter what happened, there we were, with an Emmy to show for our efforts. That's in the record books, that's for all time, and we're thrilled to have it.
But they were nice enough 20 years later to invite us back, and we did a bunch of shows for them.
When we came back to do the reunion show, CBS came to us and said, "Oh, we'd like for you guys to be controversial and to, be on the cutting edge." And we said, "No, thanks."
Is my present only in my past? Is Dwight Clark always going to just be asked about the catch that beat Dallas? This man's still got to live a long life. And yes, that's a highlight that we'll never touch again in our entire lives.
If you don't like what we say, you have the ultimate censorship, and that is to turn us off or to turn any program off. But the right for us not to allow even to give our viewpoints to other people who are interested in hearing it is contrary, I think, to the principle of our country and to the principle that makes the world go round.
They want their dissidents out there. It gives them the illusion that there is the protest, there's a sense of freedom, and etc. They didn't want the protester to have a primetime show particularly.
It seemed normal. It didn't seem like we were doing something extraordinary. In retrospect, looking back on it, it was extraordinary.
I think when you're on the cutting edge, do not expect to be garlanded. Know that it is a minefield to get there early. 20 years later, all kinds of people come by and do the kind of thing you did, and everybody's saying, "Oh, that's terrific." When you're sort of the first and you arrive precipitously at a conflicted venue, a venue under challenge, you're going to draw a lot of heat. And then you're going to be called controversial.
I think you pay a price when you take on the establishment. We all do. And I certainly have. and I know they have, and others have. And I think the price is worth it because it constantly has some kind of Paul Revere-like claim to American citizens. You know, all is not well, and you should know that all is not well.
You can't tell a comedian, anyone, particularly a comedian, don't say that word, don't say this thing, don't do that piece. A comedian is contrary by nature. The more they said don't do it, the more it seemed it must be important. I miss not being that person now, because I would love to still be there. I'm still angry, so I have not sold out my point of view. I just have a trouble expressing it in a creative form that was just sitting there right there for the taking. It was just a great place to be. And it was easy to say it because there's people around me wanting to say it. The country wanted to hear it.